Well, hello everyone, and thank you, Michael, for inviting me along to speak to your group. It's a real pleasure.
It's a pleasure for us.
I don't normally speak about my own experiences, but Michael's asked me to touch on them, so I thought I'd just briefly start with that. But we're talking about what really are extraordinary encounters. The types of experiences that people can have, and I'll go through some of those and show you some things that people have sent me. But it's really about, for me, it's about the quest, the UFO quest, which starts off, by people seeing something, and then it can take them on a journey. But I'll just go to my experiences. So in 1985, I did a home Bible study course. For 3 years. It was intense, it was weekly, but after 3 years I started to ask these questions, which are things like, are angels really supernatural beings from heaven? Or could angels actually be extraterrestrials? Do extraterrestrials inhabit heaven? Can extraterrestrials exist in the afterlife? Can ETs masquerade as angels and spirit beings, deceased family members and friends? And I ticked all of those, and I thought, yeah, that can happen. And so I was starting to reassess the descriptions of angelic visitations in the Bible and reimagining them to be perhaps extraterrestrial. These days, I guess my understanding is somewhere between the two, but we'll sort of get into that. So in 1988, my ex-husband at the time got in touch with UFO Research Queensland, and we went along to the first meeting. That night was an AGM, and the whole committee stood down, and we got onto the committee, and I've been on there ever since. So that was 36 years ago, and it's been quite a ride. But my experiences, one of them was having a close encounter in about, I think it was around 1990, I always say 1990, 91, but this depiction is really what it was. I woke up in the early hours of the morning. It was still dark. I saw these three beings standing next to the bed. I did something really strange. I pulled the sheet up over my head and spontaneously started reciting the Lord's Prayer. I don't know why. I have since read of a couple of other people who did that, and but the next day I woke up, I knew nothing. I had no memory of it until about lunchtime, and then something triggered my memory, and I sort of went, whoa, what was that? What happened? What was that about? And I've got my own theories at various times, but I've never explored it with hypnosis, as people often suggest, but I'm quite happy just to leave it there. But that was one experience that I had. And I've had many UFO sightings. I've had an out-of-body experience while driving, and another one where I actually left my body and entered a bird, which is all very strange and bizarre. I had a chronic illness for 10 years from the second half of the 90s to mid-2000s, and during that time I had all these things that I've listed here, and I'll read them out for those who are sitting at the back of the room and can't see them. But I had a near-death experience, and I developed precognition. I had electrical sensitivity. I could start to really sense other people's emotions, particularly the negative emotions. They were really very powerful. I could sense presences in the room. I developed psychic abilities. I had a bilocation experience, spontaneous automatic writing. I was having profound dreams in the evening, which would continue during the day when I was awake. I wasn't having visions, but whatever I was dreaming, the theme of that would continue during the day, and then I'd go into it again at night. It was like there was no difference between daydreams and night dreams. I really don't know how to explain that, but it was a very, very strange time in my life. And I had an angelic experience where one day I was laying in bed very ill. And when I say ill, I wasn't fully ill. I mean, I was ill for 10 years, but there were 3 years in the middle of that, which was where I had the near-death experience. It was very acute, to the point where my husband had to pick me up and carry me into the bath so I could actually wash myself. So that went on for a bit. But I had this angelic experience where I was laying in bed and these giant angel wings just came down and wrapped themselves around me. And, you know, the message was, you're never alone. We're always here. So these were powerful experiences that I was having during that illness. And now that I look back on that time, I see that 10 years as an initiatory experience, which a lot of other people have too. I just wanted to quickly show you, and I've got 50 slides, so I want to get through these slides fairly quickly so we can actually have some conversation, but just show you some of the photos that people have sent in over the years and how they've changed over time with the new technology. So this was the Ipswich one, all right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that was with the Kodak Instamatic camera. That was quite interesting, that one. Then we've got the Perth Air Show. Then this one was taken by a woman in Brisbane who was she was very interested in taking photographs of what she thought were angels appearing in clouds, and you can see that in the back of that larger one for her. Whoops. Again, is it a UFO? Oh, I can't confirm that, but it was an interesting photograph. This one, oh, it looks like I have to use my mouse. This one was interesting because there's actually an object in the photograph taken in 2010, and you can tell that because of the shadow around the side of the object matches the shadow on the ground next to the motorcycle. So there's actually something in the photograph. Again, what it is, I don't know, but I'm just showing you these because these are very interesting photographs. And here's another one which was sent to us, which was the Valley of the Moon. And it was taken in Chile. And you can see a very small object in the contrasting against the shadow of the mountain. But when you blow it up, it looks like this, which is really interesting because there are other types of objects that people have sent to us. And this was one that was sketched by painted actually by someone they saw it in 1992 in Sydney. So it's not unlike the shape of the previous one. I'll bring that back up again. In that it's elongated with lights at the back. And then there's this one that I saw. Dave Foley was talking about it on a YouTube podcast, I think, with Jeremy Corbell. He's a good friend of Jeremy Corbell, and he's done a drawing of what he saw as well, and that was as recent as 2022. So they're the sort of things that that people have seen, but these days we get a lot of this. The one up the top with the green lights, that's a drone. I'm pretty sure, almost 100% sure that's a drone. It was taken over Lady Elliot Island, and they use drones to monitor the manta rays up there. So I'm pretty sure that that's what it was, although the witness did contact them and they never got back to them to confirm or deny what it was. But we get a lot of these, these UFOs, whatever they are, don't seem to come close to people like they used to during the 90s. We used to have some fantastic descriptions that people would give, which were really close up and intricate, but these days it's quite far away, and you just see these black screens with white dots, and people said, and this one, I'm not even sure what that is, but it's hard to tell because there's not enough data in the image. This one is a white object in the sky during the day. Again, I don't know what that is. People often don't send you all the details, and you ask for more and they don't always get back to you. And they send these black screens with white dots to say, what's this? And we go, we just don't know. There's nothing to compare it to. You can't see any speed. There's nothing in the background. We can't tell you. There's just not enough data. We also have people send us a lot of these types of images, which are lens flares. And people interpret these to be highly spiritual and significant in their lives. And that's okay because they become subjectively meaningful for people. And that's fine. That's up to the individual. But I would look at them and I'd say that they're lens flares. But, the interesting thing is that whether these are genuine things or whether they are interpretations and often misinterpretations, it doesn't really matter because these things set people off on a quest. And I've just put this one in here recently. I thought, well, I'll put this in because these sightings and unusual photographs that people aren't used to seeing, particularly with our modern technology, they're entry points into the UFO subject. And for many of those people, it's then what comes after that, after I've seen a UFO, I didn't know that I didn't really know that I would see one. These days, a lot of people accept that they're real, but there's still some who don't. But now they have to go the next step and go, so what does that mean? And they have questions like, well, are we being visited? And how often? And are we safe? And, all those sorts of questions come up. And why me is the big one, of course, and people often put forward various theories about that. So then they go on. Now, Rita was one of those people. She saw a UFO driving home one night. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. She was working for RACQ at the time and driving home from the office on her shift. And she saw this object in the sky as she was getting closer to Ipswich, where she lived. And she lost sight of it. And then she came to a stop in the middle of Ipswich City. And it came up next to her when she was stopped at the red light, and it came up next to her. And it looked like this. That's her sketch of it. Again, quite similar to the other ones that I showed you. And she said it was silver. It had, I couldn't see any rivets, any joins. It had a light out the back. It was about as big as the length of my car. And she said, Sheryl, if I was brave enough, I could have put my arm out the car and touched it. And of course, then that got her wondering, what the heck was that and why? Why did it do that? So this is what comes after the initial sightings for people is, why do these things do what they do? Why me? And what do they want? And where do they come from? And what does it mean? All those sorts of questions. So actually, Rita went on to become the organiser for the Ipswich UFO Society. She took it on from another lady who'd started it, who had become ill, and Rita did that for many years before she resigned and passed away soon after. But she was a person who she'd been in the WAFs, I think they called them, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, and she was not prone to exaggeration, and I listened to her tell a story over the years that was always the same, and she never wavered from the details of it. And she was very sort of bit of a nuts and bolts person, but and she didn't sort of go further than what she had seen, but she could have. But this is another case of a woman who was managing one of the holiday apartments buildings down on the Gold Coast. And this occurred in 1993. She didn't talk about it for a long time. And you can see that's date stamped 2012. That was when one of our investigators went to actually speak to her face to face. But I had spoken to her over the phone many times. And this is what she saw. Oh, actually, I'll go back to this. She was outside washing the towels, and late at night, there was, and she turned around for some reason, and a UFO was just hovering above her head. And she thought, oh my God, what the hell? As you can imagine. And it was silent. She didn't know it was there, but she got this sense, as we often do when something is close by, to turn around and see what was there. And that's what she saw. And she said, again, if I had had a broom or a mop, I could have reached up and touched that thing. And this was her sketch. It was a round object which was about 15 to 20 feet in diameter. It was about 8 to 10 feet high. It had windows around the middle, and they were lit up with yellow light. The object was dark grey and non-reflective. And this sketch on the right here is where she had seen it. Here's the clothesline here, and the craft is there. But she said she went inside, and she jumped up on the bed to see if she could still see it. And these disco lights started spinning around and around inside her room. And that's when she got really frightened by what was happening, because it was just seemed to be coming in her apartment. Yeah, so that sort of set her off on a quest too. And then this one, I think I'll be finished with these sorts of things soon, but this was very interesting. It was happened in 1996 outside Twin Towns RSL down at the Tweed. And fortunately, there were two gentlemen who were outside, and they were having a cigarette, and they saw this object. It came in very close, and it was quite large. I can't quite remember now, but I think it was about 50 feet above the water and about 100 feet out from them, or the other way around. I can't quite remember now, but and they saw it, and it just hovered there. And he's done another sketch here. It's catching the light, and there was no noise. It was the size of a football field, so this is gigantic. And he's written here, it was black as black, yet shone bright silver on its massive facets wherever the moonlight touched. Just going to make that a bit bigger. So, yeah, it was pretty fascinating, actually. And he said it was just such a super experience. And fortunately, he was an artist. So as soon as he went home, he sketched it, which was great. And let's go down to this one. And this is the area today, what it looks like. But you can see this here sort of this building here marks his sketch over here. And that's what they saw. And to give you an idea of the size, he actually inserted a sketch of it into this newspaper clipping, so you could see how huge this thing was. And the interesting thing was, he said that as it took off, it just flew straight through a building. And he said his words were, it cut through that like butter. And that sort of brings up a whole lot of other questions, doesn't it? Like, how did it go through a building? What are the physics involved to be able to do that from some sort of advanced technology? And what about the people in the building? Were they affected? All those sorts of questions come up. So it was a pretty interesting, exciting that he had, and it just sent him off on a quest as well. And this one here happened in 1977 in New Zealand, and there were two boys. They'd gone on holidays with one of the boys' mothers, and they were at Lake Taupo. And in the evening, they went down to the water's edge, and they were sitting there, and they saw these objects, two objects actually, at the back here. And suddenly one went up and one went out. And they thought, what the heck's that? So that they sort of stood up, and the next thing they looked at each other, because this blue light was shining down on both of them. And at the same time, they looked at each other and said, "You're all blue." And then the next memory that this gentleman who had contacted me said was that the next memory I had was I'm running along the beach. I'm running along the beach, my head's turning from side to side, looking for my friend, but I'm running for my life and I don't know why. And then he said, and then the next time I turned my head, my friend's beside me. Now he's running along the beach with me, and we ran all the way home. And they tried to tell his mother, what had gone on. And she's saying, "Oh, stop it, boy, stop it. Just go to bed, just whatever it is, just stop it, stop it." And she sent them to bed. The next day, of course, the mother's outside hanging out some laundry, and the neighbour came out, and she said to the neighbour, "Oh, those boys, they're terrible. I just couldn't get them to settle last night. They told me about this object that they'd seen in the sky." And fortunately, the neighbour had been listening to the news that morning and said, "Well, actually, there were reports of UFOs seen in this area last night." So it confirmed for the mother that the boys were telling the truth and something very strange had occurred. And this one occurred in Yawa, which is way west of Brisbane here, in 1988. And this is a really peculiar report because the gentleman involved was a senior police officer. And he used to meet up with his brother who lived in Canberra at the time. This gentleman's since passed away. And they had a mine there that they would go and spend a couple of weeks together mining. And that was their idea of fun. So they went into the mine one time, and when they came out, they realized that they had missing time. And they also, one of the evenings, they saw this. They'd gone to the bathroom and in the camping ground, and one of the brothers waited outside for his brother who was inside. And he yells out to his brother, "Come out here, I'm seeing a UFO, come out, come out." And the other brother who's in the loo yells out, "Oh yeah, righto, whatever you say." But he says, "No, really, come out, come out." So he did. And they saw this massive UFO, 230 meters in diameter, with all these little ones moving around it. Now, there's a whole story involved in this with missing time, with seeing a being who was a mantis being. This policeman, he actually thought he was going crazy because he was on the cleanup crew of these terrible, terrible accidents that occur where you've got to go and scoop up human bodies. And so he thought the stress of the job was getting to him, but actually he realized after a while that it wasn't that at all, because his brother had seen it, and this mantis being had appeared to his brother in the cabin that they were staying in. And he was a lovely man, but he was really angry about what was going on because he was abducted many, many times. He was taken onto a ship against his will. He referred to the little beings on the ship as little buggers, except he didn't use the bugger word, he used the other one. And, he was angry, really angry about being taken against his will. And we had a lot of these reports in the 1990s, which is when he came forward about his experience. But he developed he was starting to have paranormal experiences, and he talked about one day when he was at police headquarters in Brisbane, and he was walking along in the car park, and all the motorbike cops come and they park their bikes in a row, and a friend of his calls out behind him and says, "Hello, hello, how are you going?" He turns around and he's talking to him over his shoulder and walking at the same time. And then after a while, he turns it back around and he realizes that he's just actually walked through this row of parked motorcycles. And he said, "I don't know how it happened. I really just don't know." So he had a lot of strange experiences like that too. So, and I've just got two more to talk to you about like this, which was, this case involved a woman who lived in Cunnamulla at the time. She was only 17 when this experience happened to her. and she was driving along the road from Cunnamulla to Burke, and she just bought this new car. Well, it was new to her anyway. It was the first car that she ever had, huge car for a 17-year-old. And she was driving along, and these lights, they entered the car. It was in the evening. They entered the car, and they were very small, and they were buzzing all around her body. And she could actually see them in the rear view mirror. That's how she knew that something was going on to start with. They were around her head, and then she looked down there around her body. And she said the crazy thing was that as I was driving in the evening, if a truck's headlights or another oncoming vehicle's headlights started to show, the lights would disappear. But as soon as that vehicle passed me, they would come back again. And she said this went on and on and on, and she didn't know what on earth was going on with her. But what happened was, and this was the very strange thing, was that she found that this car seemed to have a mind of its own. And she was parked in the main street one day, and the car drove itself. It moved itself. It wasn't on. She had the keys in her pocket, and suddenly it just moved. And she didn't know why. And this would happen so often that the locals who would sit outside the hotel, they'd end up laughing because it became such a common sight for her car to be, sort of bumping up against the cars in front of her that were parked, not damaging them, but just bumping and pushing them. And she said, I don't know how that happened because I always had the keys on me. It was just bizarre, and it really just drove her crazy. She didn't know what was going on. There were other things that were happening too, but for the electrical system in the vehicle was obviously affected. And we sometimes wonder whether the electrical systems in the human body are affected that can actually instigate these paranormal and other types of psychic experiences that can occur. And we'll talk a bit about that later. And then this is the last one like this, this was a woman who called. She was staying on a rural property at the time. The family were expecting I think it was the daughter, who was flying in to spend time with them at some sort of family occasion. She never showed up. And a search party was sent out for her. They looked, they couldn't find her. There was no reports of a plane crashing, nothing like that. And eventually, 2 days later, she showed up. Now, when she pulled up, she was surprised because there was no one on the family property. But eventually, she waited, and eventually, they trickled back, and you're saying, "Where the heck have you been? Where have you been?" And it turned out that she had 2 days of missing time, whereas she thought she'd only been flying for an hour. So it's quite a remarkable sort of situation where something like that can occur, but it's not the first time we've heard it. It's the longest that I've ever heard, but I've certainly heard of people going missing for hours, if not an afternoon. And this was a third-hand report, so I couldn't actually talk to the woman involved herself. This was from one of the friends who was at the family property. So I couldn't get into a lot of details with her. I really wanted to talk to the pilot. So these are types of experiences. They shatter the human psyche. They, it's almost like, they're initiatory type experiences in that people suddenly start to think outside the box that they've been living in. They ask questions, well, if we're not alone, well, what else do I not know? What else is being covered up? they started to get into the whole medical system and the political system, and are things really the way that I thought that they were, and the education system, all those sorts of things. They start questioning everything, which sends you on a journey, doesn't it? You become part of that sort of alternative community, I suppose, spiritual community, awakening community, which is can be very meaningful for people, extremely meaningful, and it can make you feel like you're on a quest to somewhere else which you thought you'd never be. This next case, which I wanted to talk about, occurred in September 1988 in Sapphire. And it was a woman who I grew quite close to as a friend. And she told me her many, many years ago when I first met her. And she told me about an experience that she had where she was camping with her husband. And she was, the car had actually broken down, believe it or not. And they had to look around for a place to stay overnight while they could get the car repaired. But it's out, it's out in the middle of Whoop Whoop in Sapphire. So they really had to wait for things to be delivered and people to turn up who could fix it. Anyway, so they stayed in this tent, and she's laying in the tent in the evening in the caravan park at Sapphire. And she's looking out the open flap and she sees this object, this light in the sky. And then out of it flies these, crisscross boomerang shaped objects as well. The next thing she knows is that she's in this scenario where these beings show up. They're in I didn't put the other one, no. But they're on a flat platform, but with like seats in it, like a really modern open car, but there's no wheels. It's actually just flying. And in the front of it is a man who looks like this, a woman beside him who's holding a child, and in the back there are two other people. And they come to a halt in front of her and they communicate telepathically. And this is the interesting thing, that in all of these experiences, the communications are always telepathic. So I can see why people branch out into consciousness, because this seems to be where we're at in the evolution of the phenomenon, in our understanding. So they're communicating with her telepathically, and the woman says, this is your unborn son. Basically, you're going to have this child. Of course, she hasn't had a child. But what they do is she's begging to be able to hold the child. And what they do is they say, okay, but they spray her down first. We often hear this about people entering UFOs or some sort of craft, and they're sprayed down with something and then they're immediately dried off. So I'm guessing it's to do with, protecting themselves against all sorts of bio problems that can occur when you've got two species meeting, or two different beings from different environments meeting up. So some sort of preventive measures are taking place. So then she has that, and then they give her the child, and she's holding it and looking at it and how beautiful the child is and loving it and all this. And then they say, okay, we've got to go, give us the child. And she's going, no, I don't really want to let go, But eventually she gives the child back and she's crying or feeling emotional anyway, and they disappear. And then she wakes up. The next thing she knows, she's back in the tent. She's waking up in the morning next to her husband, and she realizes her experience as what has happened. And that really sent her on a quest, and which first of all made her feel very different to other people, because when she told me that story, her experience, those type of experiences weren't being spoken about it's only in recent years that we're hearing about people, having experiences with unborn children and in an extraterrestrial environment. Stories of people having sexual encounters, falling pregnant, having missing fetuses, or never having had sex but being pregnant, those types of experiences. A bit like Jesus' birth story, isn't it? Where Mary, born of the Virgin Mother. So yeah, they're very much alive, those experiences in Australia. We have them. One of the things I spoke about on a podcast I was doing with Damien Knott, we called it The Dark Side of Ufology, Part 1 and 2. It's on our YouTube channel, where women were forced to have sex, and men too. And we have that story with Peter Curry, who's in Sydney, and he had that experience with a woman who indicated, which he didn't really understand, and she looked human, but it turns out that she had some sort of strange DNA, which really wasn't, was rare DNA. And Bill Chalker wrote a book about that, The Hair of the Alien, I think it's called. And then years and years ago in 1957, we had the story of Antonio Villas-Boas, who also was forced to have sex with a woman who then indicated to him that she was going to take his child out to the stars. It's not unheard of, that's for sure, and it still happens today. And I wanted to touch on this as well, because it's quite, you don't hear about this a lot, but we do have cattle mutilations in Australia too. I'll just put this up here because some images disturb people. So if you don't want to see these images, don't look, okay? But this was a story that was in the news about Judy and Mick Cook, who had lost 20 cows over about 10 years, I think it was, all to do with, and they're all mutilated. This is just northwest of Mackay. And these are some of the other images where the ears, the tongue, the muzzle, the udders, they can all be cut off. In some cases, tails are missing, etc. Where are we? This was a recent one in Victoria. It was shared by Ben Hurl, who's a colleague down there. And this animal was found on a property that was being overseen or minded while the owner was away. And the person who found the animal, they found this animal up on the hill, and the muzzle had been cut out, the udder had been removed, and the back end of it had been removed too. And of course, early reports of cattle mutilations too occurred in this area west of Townsville. I think it was probably in the 70s, and I've got this information out of John Pinkney's book, who he's passed on now as well. But at that time, there was these spate of mutilation raids that were happening in Winton and Boulia and Julia Creek and Hewenden, etc., Mount Isa. And John didn't record all the details because the book was written at a time where you didn't sort of collect all the fine details that we do today. But, there was a stockman who told him that particularly on one occasion, that he had found at the evening, in the evening, there were orange lights hovering over the herd that he was watching. And in the morning, he found 5 cattle that had been mutilated and were now deceased. And I'm sure that there are many of those types of reports in our country areas. There were some south of Ipswich at one stage that a colleague was looking into. But our cattlemen don't really like to talk about it because they don't want to bring attention to it. They don't want people trotting around in their properties and disturbing their animals and all that sort of thing. But it's a real part of the UFO, well, it seems to be related to the UFO phenomenon, put it that way. And I think that, when people ask me, if a UFO landed, would you go and get on board? And I'd say, well, actually, I wouldn't, because I was taught stranger danger as a child. But there's also, there is a dark side to the UFO phenomenon as well as the lighter side, and we always have to keep that in mind, I think. And that was certainly the case in the US, because I know that the FBI in the 70s, they looked into it because there were a lot of animals that were killed there. 8,000 cattle and horses had been butchered with surgical precision over an estimated 1.28 million square miles. That's a lot of animals. And typical things, no tire marks or footprints or signs of human activity. They couldn't put it down to predation. The animals, when they had not struggled, so there were no gouge marks in the ground around them. Blood and certain parts of the animals had been taken. Here they say the buzzards and coyotes refused to eat the mutilated horses and cattle. Some of the carcasses had seemed to have been lifted up off the ground and later found with clamp marks on the legs. All sorts of things happened. That's just a few, but there was a lot that went on. And just touching on that a little bit more, there was the story of Lindsay Hartwig, who he found his son dead next to about a metre from a burned circular ring on the property. No one knew what happened to him. His son Graham's body was found near that circle of grass, dead grass. The police went and camped on the property for a couple of weeks. At the same time, another man went missing. I think a pig was found mutilated. A few different things went on, and this was one of the articles that John Pinkney wrote about, and it remained a mystery. No one really knew what happened to that boy, but except that his body was found next to this circular mark that had been burned onto the ground. It's quite large. I think it was about 30 feet or 30 meters in diameter. It was pretty big anyway. So I just put that in there because, it's lovely to go off with the aliens out there to higher spiritual realms, but we need to keep our feet on the ground at the same time and look at the reality of the phenomenon too. So all these sort of experiences forge people in the fire. They in some cases they can potentiate people. They can then go on and develop these psychic abilities and precognition, spontaneous mediumship abilities. I've spoken to these types of people. Things, like one fellow I went and interviewed in the city here, he said that he was sitting after he'd seen these UFOs and had other experiences, he's sitting in a cafe one day and the fines of his fork just curled up. He went home, he went to put his key in the lock of his apartment and it just turned into butter. There's really strange stuff that goes on around these experiences, and we just can't explain them, but they are certainly different. And I'm just going to touch on one more thing, then I'm going to open it up for questions or comments. And I'll leave it here. This is the case of Robin, and she's on YouTube. You can see her whole story. I think it's actually on the Strange Encounters channel, because I run two groups, UFO Research Queensland and Strange Encounters Down Under. And she had an NDE when she was 17, and when she left her body, and I'm sure you all know what NDEs are, near-death experiences, which was caused by the anesthesia being mixed up when she was getting her tonsils taken out. And she left her body, and she's looking at this tunnel in front of her, and there's a light at the end, and she sees streams of people in front of her in these lines going towards the light. But she also sees another stream of people coming back from the light. And in that, they're just passing her as she's going towards it. And in that, she sees this little being. And because she's 17 at the time, and she said she described him as a him, but it had a strange shaped head, very emaciated body, small, and she thought, oh, poor little thing. Look at him. He's not normal like the rest of us, basically. That was sort of the end of the experience because she came back into her body. But years later, when she came to one of our meetings, she walked in the door and someone was speaking about these little grey aliens at the time, and they had an image up on the screen. And she said, I saw it and I thought that is exactly what I saw during my near-death experience. So that opens up the whole question of, which is what I'm really interested in, is seeing extraterrestrials, aliens, non-human entities, whatever they are, during near-death and out-of-body experiences. And I actually gave a presentation about that recently. I don't know if it's up on a YouTube channel yet, but on the Strange Encounters, I think it is, about these people who have these types of experiences. And it sort of, it makes you wonder about what they are. Why are they in people's lives? Why do they make themselves known? What's going on, really? Are they involved in human evolution, reincarnation, soul experiences? There's a lot to talk about there. Well, the thing is that daytime reports are much more rare than evening reports because a lot of people work. So they're often in buildings or looking down at the ground. So there's not as many of those reported, but certainly, people do see them without lights during the day, for sure. Yeah. I couldn't give you a percentage on that because there's just so few of them. These beings, these entities, let's just call them entities, and I really don't know what some of them are. And it's really hard for us to determine that too, but they seem to present themselves in that way for whatever reason. And that's not to say they don't look like that, but I think that they can change form too. I think some of them can be physical and non-physical. There's a book called, some of you have probably heard of the Urantia book. It was channeled in the 50s. It's a huge book. It's yay big, yay thick and big. And it's in there they talk about these midways who look after the human soul, but they're also extraterrestrial or extraplanetary beings who can be both physical and non-physical. I think that, we're really scratching the surface about the subject, where we've all got parts of the puzzle, and we've all had our own, a lot of people have had their own experiences and they interpret it in their own way, and that's fine too. Who's to say who's right, who's wrong, and maybe it's a bit of everything. So yeah, it's certainly a fascinating subject. That's for sure. And I was listening to a podcast this morning with Dr. Gary Nolan speaking with, is it Tyler Banks? Is it Banks who's the Hollywood psychic? Any of you?
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah.
Fascinating they actually got together to speak, which was really interesting. And they were talking about, how beings can present themselves, and particularly Tyler. And Gary Nolan's had his own experiences too. He's a scientist. And this is the very interesting thing now. I'm hearing more scientists going public talking about their experiences too, which I think is great because it gives other scientists and academics permission to come forward and talk about their experiences. But these two were talking about, these experiences people have as initiatory experiences, and which are, subjectively meaningful in so many ways, and they can launch us into work that we may not have considered, or lifestyles that we may not have considered, and change our, the brain's neuroplasticity. And they were talking about how the shamans, they're selected at a young age before the neuroplasticity in the brain decreases, which is around the same time you stop being able to learn additional languages. And it's curious that close encounters are often reported to begin at around 3 or younger, because they do have, people who have these experiences have very good early memories. So I wonder whether the reason why these types of experiences, close encounters, start at such a young age for some people, is to be able to entrain their brain in a way that they can continue to have encounters throughout their life before that neuroplasticity actually sets, if that makes sense to anybody. But I just thought it was a fascinating thing. It just, something just went click in my mind. And I'm very interested in this because I teach shamanic practices anyway. So I'm really curious as to how these experiences, close encounters, do what I call shamanize people. They initiate people into a different way of being, a different way of living, thinking, and approaching everything, and expands their mind, and stimulates or catalyzes those psychic abilities for people too. You may have heard of Daniel Brinkley, who had near-death experiences, one where he was shot out of his boots when lightning struck the telephone line in the days of the old corded phones, and went right through his body and melted the nails in his boots, and so he just shot out of his boots. The boots stuck to the floor. He's what people would call a lightning shaman. They're very powerful because shamans who are struck by lightning and survive are thought to be very powerful people. But they also, Daniel Brinkley also developed these abilities. He could be close to people and know things about them. And it just sort of switched on after his experience, which is fascinating. But it happens after close encounter, or can happen after close encounters too. Well, when Dr. Ken Ring, who was one of the founders of the International Association of Near-Death Studies, he was here in Australia in 1995, and I was asked to take over the Brisbane leg of his talks, which I did, and he stayed with me for about 3 days. And he's the one who wrote the book UFOs, NDEs, and Mind at Large. And he's the one who sort of switched me on to the whole, in those days, and to the connections between those experiences. I was fascinated. I mean, his book, I call The Omega Project, is just almost falling apart. I've read it so many times. I wish someone else had sort of picked up and followed on the work that he'd started with that book. It's fascinating because he was trying to find the connections between people who have near-death experiences and people who have close encounters. And he found a lot of them. And, often they'll have early childhood trauma, or they'll be put into situations where they have to take on more responsibility than what they should at that age. For example, if one of the parents is an alcoholic, or one of them's sick, or one of them's died, and they've got siblings, and they've got to then look after them to help the parent who has to go out and work, those sorts of things. That situation can be quite, it expands the individual, it hothouses them, I guess you'd say, and makes them grow up a lot faster than if they just had a normal childhood. That was the case with myself. I had a mother who had mental health problems and still does. And it was a bit of a nightmare childhood. But, I think part of that was the groundwork for me to have, near-death experience, out-of-body experience, see UFOs, psychic experiences, those sorts of things. Because it shifts your brain out of the way it was operating into another way of being, I think. And that's one of my questions is always been, why do some people have these experiences and others not? And when you get the answer, can you please tell me? Because I'd like to know. Yeah, I think the last thing we want is what they call catastrophic disclosure, undoing what you were just talking about. And I mean, if you had that, you'd have vigilante groups going up and down the street going, I knew that person in the street was an alien, that sort of thing. We just don't want that.